Hello everyone. My name is Johannes, and I work here as a developer for Codecentric, and I'm the current maintainer of the Spring Boot admin project. And I guess you are all using Spring Boot, and you know the Spring Boot actuator endpoints. And maybe you are tired, as my colleague Thomas and Dennis was, of staring at pure JSON, and so they had the idea of writing a small UI for the endpoints, and that's how Spring Boot admin was born, I think 2.5 years ago. And in between, I now am the maintainer. And in the next 30 minutes, I will show you not only the new version at the end, but also how to set up the current version using Spring Boot 1.5. I will tell you a little bit what's about happening behind the scenes. And if we have enough time, we'll have a short Q&A sections at the end. So if you are afraid to ask in public, you may also use the hashtag on Twitter. Now, let's get started. The Spring Boot admin server itself is just a simple Spring MVC application. So everything you need to do to get started is go on the Spring initializer and generate a web application. And maybe you have seen Josh and me coding this morning. We are working on integrating Spring Boot admin in the Spring initializer itself. So either you go on start.spring.io and you see a nice web page, or you can just use this nice little curl commando to fetch and scaffold project for a web application and extract it to the current directory. And for Spring Boot admin server, you need to add 2 dependencies to your POM. One is the server itself, which all contains the controller services, REST endpoints, and so on. And the second one is the UI itself. It's just a bunch of statics, JavaScript files, and CSS, and so on. And it's an Angular 1x application, single-page application. So I decided to split up those two in case you want to copy all the sources and do some modifications on it, and so that you can switch out the UI. And last but not least, you have to import the configuration for the admin server so that everything gets instantiated as being the controller services and so on. And when I won't do live coding for the sake of time, I just prepared a small project doing exactly that. And when we just start up the, oh no, misspell, yeah. And if we start up the application using Spring Boot Run or the package jar with Java jar, the UI should be accessible in the browser. Yeah, and we see that we ain't seen any application. So we basically, Spring Boot admin server is running, but we don't see any of the applications we like to monitor. So we have to register basically applications we want to monitor at the admin server. And one easy way of doing this is just using the Spring Boot admin client. And so if you have an existing Spring Boot application, you just need to include our starter for Spring Boot admin client, which contains some auto configuration, which is triggered by setting the Spring Boot admin URL and basically telling the client where to find the admin server. And if you include it to your application and start it up, it will, after your application has started up, it will start registering at the admin server. And I've just used the Spring Pet Clinic example and did those little steps. Now, when the application comes up, it should register and should pop up in the list. There it is. And yeah, we in the starting page we show all registered applications. If you have multiple applications using the same name, they will be grouped together. So the largest installations I know of are using about 200 instances monitored by Spring Boot admin. And yeah, we have a short look at the UI. So we basically see here the name of the application. Since the pet clinic examples don't set the Spring application name property, it's just Spring Boot application, but you should provide your own name for the Spring application. Next to it, we see the current version, and if you have a simple plain Spring Boot project generated from the starter, start Spring IO, the version won't show up, so you basically need to execute the build info goal from the Spring Boot Maven plugin during your builds. And what this does is basically add build.properties file in the jar, which contains information about the project you've built. And this is what we also see here in the info section. As we see here, build, name pet clinic, the artifact name, group version, and this version we're querying via the info actuator endpoint and showing it here in the UI. So you basically see directly which version you are running, and if you're doing rolling updates, you see directly which version, which node has which version. Also, the info endpoint is really useful for adding some links. In this example, I just added a link to the sources of the pet clinic project. So basically, you can just add whatever you like, documentation, issue tracker, whatever sources like here. So yeah, if you have having problems with the application, you could just go click on the link and file an issue for the application being down or so. What the Spring Pet Clinic also does is showing here the information about the Git commit plugin, which information about the used Git commit, which is added by the commit ID plugin, and it's similar to the build info goal from the Spring Boot Maven plugin, and just adds a property file with information about the Git commit used to build this application. Now, and that's most important, at the right-hand side, we see the current status from the actuator endpoint, and Spring Boot admin frequently polls the health endpoint in the background, and even if the web UI isn't open in your browser, it polls the health in the background and can notify you about nodes going down. So yeah, it's a small little monitoring. We provide additional detail views to inspect your instance. I won't go into much detail here, but we provide information taken from the metrics here for the JVM, for example, or if there are metrics for data sources, like in the pet clinic examples, we also show information about the data sources, or if you're using caches, we show them as well. And one of my favorite endpoints is the logging endpoint, which just uses the loggers endpoint of Spring Boot actuator, and you can reconfigure your log level simply at runtime by clicking, and without using any magic curl commandos or even editing configuration files and restarting. We also can provide you a view of the current log file even with following. In order to do that, you need to tell Spring Boot to write a log file so that the log file endpoint is activated. So basically, it's not out of the box. And if you adhere to the 12-factor apps and don't write a log file, we just can't provide you a log file, and you need to access this in some other way. And last but not least, you can add Jolokia to your application. Jolokia is basically a small library just exposing your JMX-Beans from the JVM via HTTP. And if you have it on the class path, Spring Boot will also instantiate a Jolokia endpoint. And we're using this just to interact with your JMX-Beans, and you see all hands-on of information about the JMX-Beans, and even can invoke operations. So you don't need to hassle along with some tunnels for JConsole or whatever you have. On this slide, I just show you how to add how to write a log file, or how to add the hyperlink to the info, or just to activate the build info goal. Just brain that simple. And I mentioned the notifications earlier. We provide plenty of implementations for notifications. We can send you an email, a Slack notification, Opsgenie, whatever you like. And if nothing of the pre-implemented notifiers match your needs, you can even implement your own. And this is why I consider Spring Boot Admin more a library and not a runtime. So we give you just a jar, a queued you may execute or not, and even add your own code. Or we're just even in the server making heavy use of the conditional beans. So basically everything you like can be switched out with your own implementation. In case you don't like to add the Spring Boot Admin Starter client to your application, or already using some sort of Spring Cloud Discovery, you don't need our client. You can just add a discovery client to the Spring Boot Admin server itself, and it can it discovers the application to monitor simply via the used discovery client. And since there is also a discovery client which just uses static configuration, you can even configure your clients you wish to monitor statically. That's for the basics. Now have a look what's happening behind the scenes. As mentioned, the client, when it's is configured and the auto configuration triggers, just start the thread and registers periodically at the admin server, and it looks at the configuration of the application, like the host name, the port, configured context path, and tries to figure out where itself might be reachable for the outside world, and just or for the Spring Boot admin server, and submits this information to the admin server. And in case the guessing is somewhat wrong, maybe because you have multiple different host names or a proxy in front, you can just customize this with a little bit of configuration. And when the application has registered, the Spring Boot admins just starts polling the HTTP endpoint, the health endpoint. And in case you have like small Apache servers or something else, and you wish to monitor just this part, like with it, just for health monitoring, you can register it with a simple HTTP post to the admin server, just submitting a health URL, and the Spring Boot admin server checks does it respond with 200 OK or with a 500 server error, and then status down and notifies you. When we are clicking on the user interface in a web app, the requests from the browser are just forwarded by the admin server to all the clients. And currently itself, it's using Spring Cloud Zoo for this. And so every application you want to monitor currently has to expose the Actuator endpoints via HTTP. We had the request of supporting non-web applications, but it's not currently not possible. And this brings me to security, as you maybe want to not to expose all these sensitive endpoints to all users or to everybody who has access to your network. Spring Boot admin itself doesn't ship any pre-configured security. The only thing we provide is a login page, a logout button, and an example in the documentation as it's a simple Spring application. You can just use the HTTP filter chain from Spring Security and configure it as you like and as your needs are. And even if you're doing some weird custom SSO, whatever, you need to inject custom headers into the requests made to the client applications, you can implement a simple interface HTTP headers provider and add these headers to the requests. And you should think of how to solve it. As you could say, the admin server decides is this user allowed or not, or just passing the user information along to the client application so that every client application can decide for itself, should I allow this request or shouldn't I? Okay, and this is also a main reason why we don't ship a pre-baked runtime, as I can't guess how you would solve security for yourself. We just ship the jar files to use and no Docker image or alike. Now, what's coming up for Spring Boot Admin 2.0? As you may know, Spring Boot is scheduled for the end of February, I think, and I try to release the Spring Boot admin shortly afterwards. Dependent on the Spring Cloud Finchley release as well. And for Spring Boot admin 2, we will basically support Spring Boot 2.0 and use the same baseline, Java 8, Spring Framework 5, and so on. We will support reactive web flux applications as well as old-fashioned servlet applications. We're trying to be Java 9 ready, as the current version has a problem with split packages across the Maven modules. We have to fix that for Spring Boot Admin 2. We try to support Spring Boot 1 and Spring Boot 2 client monitored by the Spring Boot Admin 2. It may be that we can't support all features for the old clients, since some of the Actuator endpoints have changed very heavily in the new Spring Boot release. And last but not least, our UI, now I think it looks like worn out shoes. It's an old Angular 1 application based on Bootstrap 2, I think, so 2 versions behind. I decided to re-implement the user interface, and I'm using Vue.js for it, and have a nicer design. Now, I'll give you a short demo of what the interface will look like. It has been cleaned up, and It's not visible in this example with just one instance registered, but with Spring Boot Admin 2, we not just group the applications by name on the UI, also the backend has the notion of an application consisting of multiple instances. And this maybe allows us in the future to implement multi-node actions, as you would like, for example, set the debug level for all your instances of the same application at the same time with one click, and not going forth and back and doing it for every single instance. And yeah, the UI itself basically shows the same info. I added some nicer charts using D3. What I'm a bit proud of is the new threads view, as it shows how the threads behaves over time, and maybe you know this view from JVisual VM, which is just here a small ripoff. You can find us on Stack Overflow, GitHub, Gitter, if you want to come back a few days later and have some questions or found some bugs or want to propose a feature. So yeah, I think I'm done. We have a bit of time for questions if you like. If not, yeah, see you later.